الحمد للإله سابغ النعم وخالق الإنسان من بعد العدم، فالحمد ثم الحمد ثم الحمد لك حمدا كثيرا طيبا يا رب لك. أعطيتنا خيرا كثيرا ربنا، سترت عن كل الورى عيوبنا، ثم الصلاة بعد والتسليم على النبي المصطفى الكريم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and welcome to another episode of our exciting series towards understanding Surah Yusuf. I am your host, Yasir Qadhi. In our last episode, we had discussed how the wife of Aziz tried to seduce Yusuf alayhi salam and how he resisted her temptations. In today's episode, we will continue this story and discuss how she attempted to seduce him yet again, and how once again the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam attempted to throw her back and repel her, and how they punished him for his innocence. Stay with us.
لقد كان في قصصهم عبرة لأولي الألباب ما كان حديثا يفترى ولكن تصديق الذي بين يديه وتفصيل كل شيء وهدى ورحمة لقوم يؤمنون.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. We are still talking about the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, and we were at the point where the wife of Aziz is attempting to seduce Yusuf alayhi salam to commit that evil deed with her. And we mentioned that the Quran clearly says she had a burning desire for him. And then the Quran says, and he had a desire for her, were it not for the fact that he saw the evidence from Allah. Now here, as we said, a lot of scholars found this problematic, but a lot of others did not find it problematic, and this seems to be the stronger position. Now we can understand this portion in one of two ways. The first way is that we can understand that Yusuf alayhi salam did not have any desire for her, but he would have had he not seen the evidence from Allah. So because he saw the evidence from Allah, that prevented him from having a desire. But the more realistic interpretation, and the one that appears to be the strongest, Allah says, and he also had a desire for her. And were it not for that evidence that he had, the two desires would have met and they would have done the deed. But the evidence that he had, i.e. the knowledge that he had, prevented him from following his desires. So Allah does not negate that he himself had desires for her. What Allah negates is that he didn't act upon those desires. And for us, in this story and in this version, there is much benefit and wisdom. Yusuf alayhi salam is not an angel. Yusuf alayhi salam is not superhuman. He is a human being. He feels the same emotions, the same lust, the same desire that any man would have felt in that situation. Therefore we sympathize with him. We feel his pain and anguish. And yet, even though he had that lust, he controlled it. And that was where the righteousness comes. Not that he didn't have lust, not that he didn't have the emotions. The true piety came when he fought those emotions, when he controlled those emotions, when he kept those emotions in check. And it was the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fear of Allah, the love of Allah that caused him to control those emotions. And my dear brothers and sisters in Islam, the lust of sexuality is so powerful that the only emotion that can keep it in check is the emotion of the taqwa of Allah. So Yusuf alayhi salam kept it in check and did not act upon it. And Allah says, وَاسْتَبَقَ الْبَابِ. The two of them raced one another. Imagine the scene. They are locked up in this house all alone, and the two of them are racing one another. Even though the physical goal is one, and that is the door, the spiritual goal could not be farther apart. The spiritual goal is exactly opposite. The physical goal is one, and that is the door. But Yusuf alayhi salam is rushing to safety. He is rushing away from evil. He is racing to Jannah, while she is racing to the doors of Jahannam. While she is racing, physically wanting to force him to do that deed with her. The two are racing to the same destination, but Yusuf is wanting Jannah, and she is wanting the fire of hell. Look at the difference between the two. Also see how the lust that she had caused her to act in this manner. Also see how is it possible for a human being to be so much taken by that lust that they physically want to force their desires upon another person. And imagine, what man could have refused such a temptation? What man could have done so? Except for the fact that that man is chosen by Allah. He has a love of Allah and a fear of Allah in his heart. وَاسْتَبَقَ الْبَابِ وَقَدَّتْ قَمِيصَهُ مِنْ دُبُرٍ. She held on to him physically. And so hard was Yusuf running away that he rushed forward and she pushed him back so that the very shirt that Yusuf was wearing tore apart. So anxious was Yusuf to flee, and so anxious was she to keep him back, that a physical tearing occurred, the tearing of the shirt of Yusuf. And lo and behold, وَأَلْفَيَا سَيِّدَهَا لَدَى الْبَابِ. They were surprised to see their master and owner, the husband and his own master, at the very door. This was a surprise. It was unexpected. And it is assumed that the master returned unexpectedly. He wasn't supposed to be there, but Allah Azza wa Jal willed that he return at a time he usually does not return. And the only one who would have the keys also to go all the way in, and the only one who would really and truly be the most hurt and the most offended and the most angry by what he has seen. All of this was the will of Allah. وَأَلْفَيَا سَيِّدَهَا لَدَى الْبَابِ. They were both surprised and shocked to find that his master and his owner, the owner of Yusuf alayhi salam, and also the husband of the wife at the very door. Immediately she says, قَالَتْ مَا جَزَاءُ مَنْ أَرَادَ بِأَهْلِكَ سُوءًا. What will be the punishment of somebody who wanted to harm your wife? Look at the way her mind is thinking. She is caught in the act, but what a devious and cunning mind she has. What an evil mind she has. She is caught with his shirt in her own hands, and yet she has the audacity to immediately blame him. But what does she say? She doesn't say he tried to hurt me. She doesn't say he did this and that. She said you must punish him. What will be his punishment? In other words, she jumps immediately to the verdict. Not even is he guilty or not. Look at her devious mind. You must punish him. He tried to do something evil with me. Also notice, she doesn't accuse Yusuf of doing the evil. She accuses Yusuf of wanting to do the evil. And there's a difference. Because if she had accused Yusuf of doing the evil, that means she too has done an evil, even if it was forced upon her. And she does not want that shame. So she doesn't say Yusuf has done something. Rather, she says Yusuf has attempted to do something. So she said, what will be his punishment? Except that you put him in jail, or you torture him, i.e. you whip him and you lash him. So immediately she accuses Yusuf of the crime. And such is the mind of the criminal, that he automatically accuses the most innocent person of the crime that he himself has done. What is the response of Yusuf alayhi salam? He doesn't just sit back. He doesn't just stay there. Immediately he says, قَالَ هِيَ رَاوَدَتْنِي عَنْ نَفْسِي. He says, she is the one who tried to seduce me. Yusuf alayhi salam attempts to defend his honor. He doesn't allow things to remain. He gets angry, and his own innocence rises. And immediately he says, this is not the case. This didn't happen. She was the one who tried to seduce me. I didn't try to seduce her. قَالَ هِيَ رَاوَدَتْنِي عَنْ نَفْسِي. So now the husband is stuck. Here is Yusuf's shirt torn. There is his wife holding Yusuf's shirt. She says Yusuf did it, and he says she did it. Who is to be believed? Allah says, وَشَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا. A witness of her own household testified. Who is this witness? Some of the scholars, they claim that this was a baby that spoke miraculously. But this does not seem to be the strongest response. Why? Because if a baby had spoken miraculously, not that Allah Azza wa Jal is not capable, of course Allah Azza wa Jal can make a baby speak miraculously. But if a baby had spoken from the cradle, there is no other evidence needed. If the baby had said he is innocent or she is innocent, that is all that is required. But rather, it is not a baby that spoke from the cradle. Rather, it is a relative of hers. شَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا. Of her own relatives. Perhaps a cousin, perhaps somebody else that she was related to, that you cannot doubt his testimony. He's not going to automatically want any harm for her. So he's trying to show that somebody from her own household gave a very just verdict. And some scholars have interpreted this to mean this was a member of her own household that knew her feelings for Yusuf. Remember, this is feeling that is going on for many years. And he wanted to defend Yusuf against his own relative, but he didn't want to say she's guilty. Rather, he said something that is a general rule. Look at the evidence. See for yourself what is the case. So he gave an intelligent response. He didn't point fingers at one of the two himself. He told the husband, you point the finger. You look yourself and see who do you think the guilty party should be. And so he gives a general ruling. He says, if the shirt has been torn from the front, this means she is telling the truth and Yusuf is lying. Meaning if Yusuf wanted to do something, he would be facing her. Yusuf would be facing her and attempting himself on her. So she's defending, she would have torn from the front. How is she going to get behind him if she is facing him? And he says, this witness, and if the shirt is torn from the back, this means he was the one running away. This means she was the one attempting to seduce him. This means he was telling the truth and she was the one that is lying. So this is a very beautiful testimony from a person of her own household, saying that, look at the evidence, look at yourself, and see for yourself who is right and wrong. This also shows us that when you look at something to decide who is right and wrong, for example, a judge in an Islamic state, you should look at all the evidences. Don't just take the word of the people in front of you. That's one evidence. You take it into account. If somebody says he's guilty, then he says he's guilty. If somebody confesses. But if there are evidences that show that certain person is guilty or not, those evidences also need to be taken into account. And in our times, we can extrapolate this to fingerprints, to DNA samples, to forensic science. All of these things play a role in our Sharia. We don't just dismiss them and say, oh, this is not allowed. No. We use our common sense. We take into account what modern science tells us is a legitimate clue, a legitimate evidence. So he gave a general ruling. And he said, now this is a point here. Some of the scholars say, how could the man have testified when he didn't see anything? Allah says he testified. Shahida shahid. The response, firstly, he didn't point fingers. So this is not a witness in that sense. The second thing, he has been a witness many years. He knows what's happening. So he's testifying to a general trend that he has seen. He is testifying that the woman has been flirtatious with Yusuf, that the woman has tried more than once in a very subtle way, in a not an apparent way, to try to win over the heart of Yusuf, but she has not been successful. So he testified to what he knew, and he then gave it open verdict, and he said, see for yourself which of the two is telling the truth. So Allah says, فَلَمَّا رَأَى قَمِيسَهُ قُدَّ مِن دُبُرٍ. When the man saw, when the husband saw that Yusuf's shirt was broken from the back, from his behind, قَالَ إِنَّهُ مِن كَيْدِكُنْ. He said, this is of your plots and plans. You plotted and planned this. إِنَّ كَيْدَكُنَّ عَظِيمٌ. Verily, your plots are very, very evil, very large, very difficult to, very evil in their scope. O Yusuf, turn away from this. O Yusuf, ignore this and overlook it. And as for you, seek forgiveness for your sin. You have made a major mistake. So the husband overlooked this and he said, Yusuf, turn away, don't say it. And as for you, then seek refuge and seek forgiveness to myself and to your gods. Verily, you have done a major mistake. So the husband did not actually undertake any action against his wife. Why? Perhaps he was too weak. Some men are not very strong in their personalities. Very, very ultra soft. And he was overly soft. But more likely, perhaps he didn't want to embarrass himself by accusing his wife of seducing the slave. So he wanted to keep it covered up and not allow his reputation to be soiled. We need to take a short break. When we come back, inshallah ta'ala, we'll continue the story. Stay with us.
لقد كان في قصصهم عبرة لأولي الألباب
كان في قصصهم عبرة لأولي الألباب
لقد كان في قصصهم عبرة لأولي الألباب
كان في قصصهم عبرة لأولي الألباب
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome back. We were right in the middle of the story of Yusuf alayhi salam and the fact that the wife of Aziz attempted to seduce him, and Aziz caught them literally right when she was trying to seduce him, and he laid the blame squarely on his wife's shoulders because he realized that my wife is the one trying to seduce Yusuf. However, Unfortunately, he did not take any action, and this is the mistake that he made. Had he taken action, then the other option would not have happened, which is what we're going to talk about in this particular segment, but he didn't do anything. Why? Because we said most likely he wanted to cover this up. He thought that this was a mistake his wife had done, that was a one-time mistake. Perhaps he did not realize, in fact, it is sure that he did not realize the depths of her lust for this slave, this prophet of Allah, Yusuf. He just thought that maybe this was a one-time thing, that she would forget about it. So he told her, seek forgiveness for what you have done, and get over this, and Yusuf, turn away from this. Don't mention it to anybody. Now, a point here that some of the scholars mention as a point of interesting fact. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the plots of women, He says, your plots are very large, very difficult. إِنَّ كَيْدُكُنَّ عَظِيمٌ. And when Allah describes the plots of shaitan, He says, إِنَّ كَيْدَ الشَّيْطَانِ كَانَ ضَعِيفًا. That the plots of shaitan are very weak. So shaitan's plotting is weak, but women's plotting is strong. Not that, a'udhu billah, women are more evil than men, a'udhu billah. But for men, the plots of shaitan are easier to overcome unless they come through a woman. Because for a man, the greatest temptation is that of a woman. So the temptation of a woman, the plots of a woman are much more difficult for a man to resist than the other plots of shaitan. And this is something that we can understand simply by how these plots are described. So we now have to talk about what happened after this. And as is our usual custom, we will first recite the verses and then inshaAllah ta'ala make an explanation of them. So we will recite from verses 30 to 35. And as I said, it would be good if you have a Quran with you and follow along with us. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقال نسوة في المدينة امرأة العزيز تراود فتاها عن نفسه قد شغفها حبا إنا لنراها في ضلال مبين فلما سمعت بمكرهن أرسلت إليهن وأعتدت لهن متكأ وآتت كل واحدة منهن سكينا وقالت اخرج عليهن فلما رأينه أكبرنه وقطعن أيديهن وقلن حاش لله ما هذا بشرا إن هذا إلا ملك كريم قالت فذلكن الذي لمتنني فيه ولقد راودته عن نفسه فاستعصم ولئن لم يفعل ما آمره ليسجنن وليكون من الصاغرين قال رب السجن أحب إلي مما يدعونني إليه وإلا تصرف عني كيدهن أصب إليهن وأكن من الجاهلين فاستجاب له ربه فصرف عنه كيدهن إنه هو السميع العليم ثم بدا لهم من مِّن بَعْدِ مَا رَأَوُا الْآيَاتِ لَيَسْجُنُنَّهُ حَتَّى حِينٍ. So in these series of verses, from verse 30 to 35, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins another segment of the story. And Allah then moves the story from the house of the wife of Aziz, the house of Aziz and his wife, to the city itself, the city in Egypt. And Allah says, the women of the city began talking. They began gossiping. They began talking about this new scandal. Somehow news had spread. Allah knows how they heard about it. Perhaps some of the other slaves, perhaps some of the other members of the household, they began talking about this. And they said, the wife of Aziz is attempting to seduce her own slave and give herself to this slave. Indeed, love has entered her heart to the greatest depths. Verily, we see her to be in manifest error. She has made a major mistake. She has fallen into a very big problem. So, despite the attempts of Aziz to make this matter quiet, to keep it hush, the news spreads. And this shows us a number of things. Of them, the evils of gossip, the dangers of spreading slanders and lies. And this is something that we in our religion are told not to talk about. Even if something is true, we don't spread it to other people for no reason. We don't spread gossip even if the gossip is true. We don't backbite about people's sins even if those sins are true. It goes against our religion. It goes against our akhlaq, because when we do so, more evil spreads. Even if we see an evil, we keep it hidden and we keep it between the person whom we saw and ourselves. We advise them directly. There's no need to embarrass them and humiliate them by spreading a personal sin in public. But as is generally the case, gossip spread, and the women began talking to one another. And they began saying that indeed she loves him violently. She has tried to seduce him. Now, some of the scholars, such as the famous scholar Ibn al-Qayyim, he says, this one phrase attempts to show in 10 different ways how the women mocked the wife of Aziz, how they disparaged and how they ridiculed the wife of Aziz, so they really rubbed salt onto her wound in 10 different ways. How so? He elaborates. The first of these ways, they don't mention her by name. They don't say so-and-so. The second, they point out her title, the wife of Aziz. So, she is not an average woman on the street. She is not just a rich lady. She is the wife of the minister. The third, they mention she is the one who was attracted and not the other way around. She is the one who started and not the other way around. The fourth, they say her own slave. Not just any slave, but somebody whom she should treat with the most contempt. This is her slave that she should get to do her menial chores. And instead of doing her chores, rather she is attracted to him in a sexual manner. The fifth is that they indicate the depth of her desire by using the word شَغَفَهَا حُبَّا, which means love has entered into the depths of her heart, and a lustful love. شَغَفَهَا حُبَّا means a sensual love and not an innocent love. The sixth, they say, تُرَاوِدُ. And تُرَاوِدُ means that she is the one attempting to seduce him. And the seventh, they use it in the present tense, meaning that this isn't something of the past. She is still attempting to seduce him even right now. And the eighth is that they imply that she was not successful. And so this is even more humiliation, that she only attempted, she didn't get to the goal. Because this shows that she failed. And this is even though the crime is evil, but if she had done the crime, at least she would have gotten something out of it. But she was humiliated in the attempt to do so. And the ninth is that they say, Inna, we, all of us, of a surety. And then they say, لَنَرَاهَا, we see her to be, the 10th thing, فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ, in manifest error. So Ibn al-Qayyim, in this short phrase, he extracts 10 ways how they ridiculed and they humiliated the wife of Aziz in this attempt to seduce Yusuf. So obviously, the news spreads back to her. Women come and tell her, you are now the talk of the town. You are now the target of the gossip mongers. Everybody is talking about you and how you attempted to seduce your own slave and how you failed in that attempt and how foolish and evil you were in what you did. You are the wife of the minister and yet you did this. So her own friends and her own community and her own social network now begins to gossip and giggle behind her back. And obviously, like any woman, she feels very angry and very enraged. So she says, so Allah says, فَلَمَّا سَمِعَتْ بِمَكْرِهِنْ, when she heard of their plot. But what is their plot? They don't have a plot apparently, but you see, no, they do have a plot. They do have an evil intention. And she is a woman, and she knows that intention. She knows that intention because she knows what she would have done in their own place. She is a woman, and she thinks like a woman does. So what was their plot? Their plot was to see the slave and to know what was the big deal, to know the details of the story. That was their plot, even though they did not verbalize it. So Allah says, when she heard of their plot, فَلَمَّا سَمِعَتْ بِمَكْرِهِنَّ أَرْسَلَتْ إِلَيْهِنَّ, she invited them. She held a general banquet. And she prepared for them a feast. She prepared for them a general banquet. And as was the custom, and it is still the custom in many places, when the banquet is finished, now they are now sitting down. She has prepared a type of, if you like, sofas and chairs, and they are now sitting comfortably, and now is the time for the dessert, and the dessert comes in the form of fruits, and with the fruits comes the knife to peel the fruit. So this is what she has done, and unfortunately right at this stage our time has also run out. So inshallah ta'ala in our next episode we will continue right from this very place where the dessert has been prepared and the fruits and the knives have been given to each and every lady. We will see what happens in our next episode. Until then, I hope to see you then. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
لقد كان في قصصهم عبرة لأولي الألباب.
صلى عليك الله يا خير الورى تعداد حبات الرمال وأكثرا. صلى عليك الله ما غيث هما فوق السهول وبالجبال وبالقرى. فوق السهول وبالجبال وبالقرى.